Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what coast you're on. So excited to have you all here. Our registration numbers are just picking up a little bit, so we're going to give our peers another minute and get started and commit to getting you out before the hour. But thank you for making space within National Apprenticeship Week to convene with us and hear some incredible perspectives. So for accessibility, I've enabled the live captions, and we also will be recording today's session. So we have audio and video enabled if you want to accept the Microsoft terms. You don't have to, though. And that would allow us to network and convene with each other as appropriate. All right, well, we're 2 minutes after the hour. My name is Marian Akers. I'm Vice President of Strategic Communications at Equus Workforce Solutions. I'm joined by my colleague, Matt McNally, who you're seeing in the chat right now, welcoming you all to today's session. Like I said, good morning or good afternoon, depending on your coast. You might be just crossing that boundary into afternoon. We are so thrilled to be spending part of National Apprenticeship Week with you. And I've been chatting with this speaker group for a few weeks, and I know you're in for a real treat. So seeing some highs in the chat. Hi, Scott, and folks coming off onto camera. It's so wonderful to see you all. In my role in strategic communications at Equus, I support our teams across the country in their customer outreach strategies. And I also have the privilege of ensuring our 3,000 employees have the resources and information they need to do the impactful work that they do every day. Whether you're joining us for today's session as a workforce board representative, an employer, training provider, institution, intermediary, or really any stakeholder, I'm hopeful that this session is going to meet you where you are and reflect what we know is the reality within our systems, that none of us does this work alone. If you didn't know, it's National Apprenticeship Week, and the Department of Labor has set daily themes throughout this week. Today's in particular is Registered Apprenticeship Drives Growth and Innovation Across Critical Industries. Our focus today is going to be on how that innovation actually happens. And I think we all know that's not within silos, but across systems. I'm going to tell you something you already know. Registered apprenticeship has long been a proven strategy for preparing workers for quality jobs, while also meeting employers' need for a highly skilled workforce. And that's one that can adapt, innovate, and respond to changing industry demands. I'd venture to say that might be more relevant now than ever. What probably feels different in this season, in this moment, at least from my perspective, is the scale of attention, definitely the investment, and the expectation placed on apprenticeship as a national workforce solution. Aligned with the federal administration's vision to reach 1 million active apprentices nationwide, apprenticeship.gov, as of last week, says about 700,000 or so active apprentices can be found across the country today. I've leveraged a map from apprenticeship.gov here on the screen to illustrate just how widespread registered apprenticeship has become, with programs operating in every state and jurisdiction. And on top of these counts another 200 plus national programs complementing state efforts. While I think we'd agree that the growth in programs is impressive, we also know many of those were built from scratch, often without the opportunity to leverage lessons learned or proven best practices from other industries, other regions, other organizations. And I think that's one of our hopes and the reasons we're here today. I've asked our panelists to be super candid, team, not only about what worked and the shiny success, but more importantly about what didn't and what they would rethink if they were starting again. I'm really excited for you to hear those insights. And I think that the next chapter of apprenticeship growth depends on us learning faster and building smarter. And so that can be part of our conversation today. To offer just a little bit of context about Equus, if you're not familiar, we work nationally with employers, workforce boards, education partners, and state and federal stakeholders to strengthen the registered apprenticeship system. As apprenticeship ambassador and a national program sponsor, and through our prior role as an industry intermediary for the Department of Labor, we've had a front row seat to what it takes to move from individual programs to coordinated systems. You'll see a few of our industry intermediaries team's outcomes on the slide, but I think what matters more than the numbers is how these outcomes were achieved. And that's through cross-sector partnership, shared accountability, and intentional system design. That perspective is what we hope to bring to today's conversation. So we're going to cover 3 main segments with today's session in our panelists. That's design, innovation, and sustaining and scaling. You'll notice we're not spending time on tactile questions. How do you register a program? Instead, we're focused on system design, buy-in, continuous improvement, because that's where durability lives. I'm excited to welcome such a strong group of panelists. Equus has had the opportunity to work alongside each of these organizations in our role as an industry intermediary, and we've seen firsthand the thoughtful leadership each of these leaders and their organization bring to apprenticeship strategy. So I'm going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves. In addition to sharing some about their role and their organization, I've also asked them to tell you the answer to this question. What workforce challenge pushed your organization toward apprenticeship? Not as a pilot, but as a long-term strategy. So, Erin, we are going to start with you.
Thank you. So I am Erin Hart, I'm Strategy Director for the Ohio Healthcare Association, and part of my portfolio is developing workforce enhancements and innovations for our members. We represent roughly 1,200 providers of skilled nursing, assisted living, home health, hospice, and DD services in the state of Ohio. And we are a state affiliate of ACA-NCAL, which is the National Association representing our industry as well. On the question that I was provided for this, the workforce problem. So we started out in apprenticeship because we had noticed a growing trend post-COVID of our licensed nursing home administrators leaving the profession and not having enough new young people being interested in becoming a licensed nursing home administrator. And one of the reasons that is the case in our state more than others is because roughly 60 to 70% of our administrator residency programs are unpaid for 6 to 9 months. So we wanted to find a creative solution to solving that issue.
Thank you so much, Erin. Just from the body language, I know that resonates some of those opportunity areas that you're solving for. All right, next I'm going to pass it to Lynn Hoffman.
Hello, everyone. I am Lynn Hoffman. I'm Senior Manager of Strategic Employer Initiatives and Partnerships with Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas. We are the 2nd largest workforce board in the state of Texas, and we are, looks like, number 6 in active apprenticeships for our state. I've spent my career at the intersection of workforce and industry, and today mainly my work focuses on building partnerships and advancing strategies like apprenticeship. And these are designed to help employers solve talent challenges while creating some real economic mobility for our residents and our businesses. From our perspective, one of the biggest issues wasn't a lack of programs. As I said, Texas is number 6 with the number of active apprenticeships and programs in the whole country, but it was fragmentation. Everyone was working in silos, whether that's a community-based organization, the training providers, the employers, the industries, and apprenticeship was still largely viewed as something that was specific to the trades. So we realized pretty quickly about 6 years ago that if we wanted to move that needle and to start to make a difference, we couldn't just be a pilot here or there. We needed to be very strategic and look at the broader systems from a strategic perspective. So we started bringing together partners across our whole region, all 3 workforce boards, 16 counties, very strong area of the DFW Apprenticeship Accelerator. And across the region, we were rethinking apprenticeship, trying to find and really specify and amplify that it is the best and a better way to hire, train, and retain talent across all industries, not just the traditional ones that you expect to see. And healthcare is one of the strong areas where we've been able to advance apprenticeship in our area.
Lynn, I think you nailed it with fragmentation, and hopefully we're going to be able to share some insights as to how your respective organizations have addressed that challenge. Next, I'll pass it to our third panelist, Christian Jones.
Hi, everybody. My name is Christian Jones, and I am the Senior Director of Workforce Development for the DC Hospital Association. I work with our networks of hospitals and healthcare partners across the district to build workforce strategies and basically working directly with business leaders to address staffing challenges and just build sustainable pipelines. And that includes leading our apprenticeship work through our HEAL program, our Healthcare Employment Apprenticeship Link, where we are connecting individuals to healthcare careers while helping our partners meet our workforce needs. And I think for us, the biggest conversation was more healthcare workforce shortages. Our business partners had roles that were sitting open while teams were stretched thin, and people already there were carrying so much more than they should have to. And so at the same time, we had a lot of individuals who just wanted to get into the healthcare business and into the healthcare industry, but weren't able to or didn't have clear supports or a way to get in. And so our business partners were not just looking for talent, they were looking to grow the right talent and to have the right talent. And they wanted to grow people from within and have a direct role in how these individuals were being trained. And traditional models were just too disconnected, right? Like it was just mentioned, and training was happening outside of the workplace, and it was not always aligned to what the jobs were actually requiring. And so apprenticeship just gave us a way to bring those things together and allowed us for training to happen in real time with real roles and with real people. And that's when it stopped being a program and became being more of a strategy for us.
So well said, Christian. All right, I'm going to ask Dana to bring us home.
Great, fantastic. And I do have some slides as well, too, I believe we're going to share as part of my introduction here. So I'm Dana Ritchie. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the Associate VP of Constituency Services and Workforce at the American Healthcare Association National Center for Assisted Living. We are the largest association representing long-term care providers across the country. We have fantastic state affiliates, and you heard initially from Erin Hart, who was the first one to be introduced here on the webinar today. She's done some fantastic work, her and the team at our affiliate there and other affiliates across the country on the apprenticeship side. The need is clear for apprenticeships, in particular long-term care, healthcare, and many other sectors as well. But for nursing homes, we really were the hardest hit healthcare sector through the pandemic. We still have 9,000 workers in order to simply return to pre-pandemic levels. And you can see that on this very compelling chart in front of you. This is from the BLS data, Bureau of Labor Statistics, noting this. We've absolutely made some positive gains, and certainly, thanks to apprenticeship role in that and introducing people to this industry and showing some great career ladder opportunities that are there. But again, there's a need for programs and supports like apprenticeship. And then the next slide too, I was going to note again, we were the hardest hit out of several healthcare sectors here in terms of the employment side. So wanted to note that specifically. Also, we have a nursing home workforce report that we recently shared as well, and I can certainly put a link and share that in the chat too. But providers have expanded promotional and career path opportunities for employees by 55% based on this report that we did, and turnover has been declining. So again, there's some great opportunities via apprenticeships, and that certainly factors into this. We also, our Caregivers for Tomorrow campaign, which I'll also share information. We have a one-pager that can go out to those that are attending here. Notes specifically different ideas and pillars we have to bolster the workforce. And as part of that, apprenticeship funding supports for it is included in there. And we really do appreciate the apprenticeship with Equus on helping our state affiliates and partners move forward with it. So appreciate being here today. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Dana. That data definitely tells a story, and part of the industry focus of today's National Apprenticeship Week observance kind of ties right in. So for the first of our 3 segments, we're going to talk about design. And when apprenticeship falls short, I think you heard our panelists in their introduction talk about it's not usually a flaw in the model, it's a breakdown in alignment across the system. And I think healthcare makes this especially clear because no one institution can do this work alone. Our panelists are going to talk about what makes it, what it takes to operate within an ecosystem and why this particular moment is a unique opportunity for alignment. So Lynn, I'm going to ask you to start us off. I'll take our slides down so we can see our panelists. In the Dallas region, what role did the Workforce Board play in convening and aligning employers and partners?
Well, the role that we've played, and I sort of mentioned it in my introduction, is as a convener and a connector, and in many cases, a funder, using public and private funding to help to support the healthcare industry. So for about 5 or 6 years, we have had the DFW Apprenticeship Accelerator, again, focusing on what would be considered non-traditional occupations for apprenticeship. And this is a collaboration of businesses, of sponsors, industry alignment, community-based organizations, training providers, and intermediaries, all bringing together information and resources to support the implementation and expansion of apprenticeship across our region. So we're all trying to solve similar problems. And as I mentioned, we needed to stop the fragmentation, bring it into one place, and focus in on business and on industry and healthcare in this area. So what we found is that the employers were overwhelmed with way too much information. It's confusing. An apprenticeship model in and of itself, the jargon is very traditional. How do we translate a journey worker into another industry? What does that really mean? So we've been able to go through and start to define and redefine and help industry understand the roles. And also, they probably already have the building blocks with job descriptions, with their career advancement opportunities, with the performance evaluations. All of those are pieces of building an apprenticeship. We've also been able to directly connect them with our Department of Labor representatives. So we're looking at different ways to streamline that process and to bring the right people into the room to make it much easier for industry to be able to move forward with a registered apprenticeship. And we've already seen that come to fruition. About 95 employers have engaged through the workforce and through this development process for apprenticeship and apprenticeship engagement. We have about 25 partners in our area that come together on a regular basis to provide that information in different settings, whether it's in panelist or work groups or speed information sessions, both virtually and in person. So we're looking at standing in the gap to really bring the information together, the resources into one place so that employers can move forward with apprenticeship.
Lynn, I love the translation term in this application. And as a communications person, there's a bit of rebranding you're doing as well, right? Of modernizing the program and applying it to those challenges of today. Christian, I'd love to pass to you next and ask you what conditions needed to be in place for apprenticeship to really resonate with businesses and employers at scale.
Ooh, I think for us, I think the biggest shift for us was making sure that, yeah, one, making sure that it was a system that we were building, right? When it first started out as a program, a small group owned it, and we were just testing it. It was somewhat separate from how hiring and workforce planning were actually happening, right? And so once it became a strategy, that changed. It moved into operations. Our business partners, hiring managers and supervisors were now directly involved. Because it became something that they connected with, and how they saw staff, and how they were going to retain, and how they were going to grow their workforce, right? And again, that shift also made us think about realities. And so for us, one of the bigger conversations was always licensure requirements, clinical hours, board of nursing, all those types of things that you can't really do without. And so so instead of trying to work around those things, we actually decided to build them into the model. And so that meant getting alignment between training providers and regulators and our business partners so that people can be employed and trained and progressing at the same time while still meeting those requirements. And when we talk about scaling, right, it was all about consistency. And if you are building a system, that's going to be number one. But again, obviously, you cannot ignore that every hospital operates a little differently, right? So what we ended up doing was to standardize some of the core competencies that were being created and those core outcomes, but give hospitals and our healthcare providers and our other business partners the flexibility in how those show up on the job. And that actually allows this to actually work across different sites, right? Um, and for us, it's not about just running programs. We're building that workforce infrastructure. And so if we can stay consistent, right, if we can actually build those guardrails around the licensure processes and the things that are things that we just cannot get around, we're able to then build the workforce infrastructure in a system that is actually very, very scalable.
Those competencies sound like a shared language to me, Christian. And um, on the language front, one of the terms we use within our leadership teams at Equus is radical consistency. So it really resonated with me, Christian, when you described those kind of enablers that needed to be in place to go from, pulling teeth to get employers and businesses to look at this program, right? From probably now needing to bat them away if you've reached capacity. So um, Dana, to round out this section, I'd love to know from an industry perspective, why is this moment different for apprenticeship in healthcare and specifically the long-term care industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So healthcare is one of the fastest growing fields, that's out there. And apprenticeships, as I noted earlier in my intro, offer a great opportunity for individuals, for career ladders as well. And just to determine if they'd like to go into long-term care or another healthcare sector for that matter, it's a great hands-on opportunity to get your foot in the door and again, see if this is the field or not. And that's okay too if they find out this isn't for me. At least they had that opportunity and support to do that. But of course, we hope most find it a good calling and stick with the field and stay with it. Also, there's been great bipartisan support overall, politically for apprenticeship as well and for funding. So that's something that's, across the aisle, everyone likes to see that. So that's another area that we certainly applaud on that front. And I noted already our Caregivers for Tomorrow campaign, and Matt posted the link in the chat with that if you want to learn more about it. One of the pillars specifically that we included in there is the support of grants for the development of skills and ongoing training for the nursing workforce, including the expansion of apprenticeship programs and accessible education programs. So we are advocating on that with policymakers as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Aaron. Our state affiliates are really the ones who can paint the picture best of what is happening at the local level and in our centers with the apprenticeship models across the country. So Aaron, I'm going to turn it to you to have what you'd like to add on this.
Thanks, Dana. It is a ripe time for apprenticeship, and I think that some of that is the generation that we are approaching. So I think one of the reasons that we're turning to this model is because the workers that we are having come in who are young from high school or coming out of college are looking for advancement in a different way. They want to learn in a different way, they want to advance in a different way, and they want to have opportunities sooner. An apprenticeship gives us in the healthcare continuum a way for us to create ladders to the next level without having to send them back to college. So an example of that is in our nursing assistant role, they can use an apprenticeship, which is our next step in our apprenticeship program, to become a medication aide before they're able to go and achieve that LPN. So I feel like the apprenticeship model is really ripe for the Gen Z that's coming out of college or high school and looking for a different way to advance in their career at a more rapid pace, which we desperately need in long-term care. I know people talk about it all the time, but the silver tsunami is a real thing. And we are soon going to be upside down on caregivers versus those who require our care. So as an industry, we have to really find a way to innovate very quickly to meet the demands that are upon us. And I think apprenticeship helps us scale that. And I really just want to add one other thing, that for us, without a partnership with someone like Equus, we would not be able to scale in that manner, because the apprenticeship programs can have a lot of difficult frameworks and reporting mechanisms. So for those of you who find that the prospect of creating an apprenticeship program daunting, I really recommend trying to reach out to a partner like Equus Workforce Solutions.
Thank you so much, Erin and Dana. I mean, that generational intersection you're talking about, Erin, is so unique to this moment right now and speaks to that level of investment and attention and expectation that we talked about in the opening. So our second segment today is around innovation, and it could be intuitive to define innovation as new tools, platforms, technology, and we love all of that, yes. But what we're going to focus on today is that real innovation can also come from rethinking when people learn, how they advance, and how to create access to opportunity. And that's the innovation where intermediaries and industry and workforce boards like our panelists today, I think, are going to offer some really interesting insights for each of you. So, Erin, we're going to go back to you and start in the reverse order this time. How has apprenticeship changed how employers think about entry-level roles and career mobility within your association?
Yeah, it's a great question for us, because we're still evolving on this in this moment. Exactly. I think for 20 years, we thought of mobility in the nursing profession to be a very standardized step ladder. You're a nursing assistant, then you become a nurse, and then you can do administrative nursing personnel. And we were missing a key aspect of that, and that's everything that happens in between. So I touched on this a little bit, but the apprenticeship model gives us steps for people to reach those higher levels or to branch in other directions. So we're using apprenticeship in a way to pull from different areas of care to bring them into another area that maybe they hadn't thought about doing before. We've done that with our LNHA registered apprenticeship program, taking people who are career veterans in long-term care who maybe thought they never wanted to be an administrator, and giving them an opportunity to create that offering for themselves. So I think that it really creates a pathway and a flexibility that our employers really didn't have in their mindsets before. And it really lends itself to folks who want that kind of flexibility, to new ways of thinking, to new ways of career advancement that we have never recruited on, that we have never publicized, because we just weren't thinking in that way. But as we're about to launch a statewide CMP grant on career ladders, directly, impacting our apprenticeship program, we're hoping to find a really large scale, widespread adoption across the industry. So then it just becomes part of the vernacular. When we talk about nursing assistant, we can talk about the full progression of care, not just banging, you could be a nurse, because not everybody wants to be a nurse, and that's okay too. So just trying to help our whole industry think about it in a different way, to give ourselves more options for who we can have come into our care communities.
It's so well said, Erin. That branching term really sticks with me as an augment to the ladder, and I think definitely resonates with this group as you're trying to create creativity almost within your network, right? About challenging maybe the way things have been structured or thought about in the past. And it sounds like you're really making strides at the Ohio Healthcare Association. So well done. Christian, I'd love to pass to you next and ask from your seat at the DC Hospital Association, how has apprenticeship changed the sequencing of learning and employment in healthcare? What are you seeing within your network?
Yeah. So I think for us, um, Well, I mean, we're in a non-traditional apprenticeship role. So apprenticeship really flips the traditional model on its head, right? Traditionally, we train people first, and then we hope that they are ready for the job. And again, what we're doing is bringing people in as employees from day one and building their skills where they are already in the role. And so that's literally the core of apprenticeship, what apprenticeship is, right? And it sounds really simple, right? For those who have like oh, it's an apprenticeship, right? But getting everyone aligned around that was probably one of our biggest wins, right? Once our stakeholders really understood that, everything started to click. Training became more relevant. Supervisors became a part of the learning process, and the expectations were clear across the board. And so that was a really big win for us. It also forced alignment, right? Training providers, the job itself, and the business and what they actually needed all had to be basically in concert. They had to connect because it was happening in real time. And um, what we were seeing is just stronger retention across the system, right? Because people are not waiting to get in. They're already in, right? They see the pathway. They are progressing from day one. So that was a huge, huge win for us. So the shift in sequencing is not just a design choice. It's the foundation, right, for the model and what makes apprenticeship work in a healthcare setting. And so, and like Mary, like you were mentioning, yeah, I mean, just by shifting that, we are moving from a place where, as an intermediary, I have a waiting list of employers and businesses who are looking to try to get in with us, as opposed to sitting and going in there and asking and saying, please, pretty please, with sugar on top, can you join us? They see that change and they see the fruits of it by looking at those retention numbers and how things move forward.
That's got to be such an exciting culture shift, Christian, to see that bear fruit. So congratulations on that in such a short time period as well. So Lynn, I'm going to bring it back to you because in your introduction, you mentioned Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas really taking on that role as convener, connector, and funder off in many cases as well. So I'm curious what funding or policy flexibilities have helped innovation in what you've seen and where current systems may still lag.
I appreciate that question. You know, one thing that occurred to me as we talked about innovation with apprenticeship, apprenticeships go back to Jesus's time. I mean, that's what the disciples were, right? So innovation in something that's been a training structure, a mentoring structure for thousands of years is very interesting to think about. And I love that this whole group is stepping into that and trying to look at different ways that we can assist industry in this. And then, long term, we're assisting our whole society, our whole culture is being able to move forward and advance. They're getting that job first, they're earning their wages while they're learning and while they're working. So I just love apprenticeship as a model. From a funding perspective, though, it's an opportunity and a challenge for us. It's probably one of the most complex parts of what we deal with as a workforce board, because there's no single dedicated fund to support apprenticeship. We have to braid funding. We have to look at eligibility. We have to pull and push and bring information and time and funding streams together. But really, some of the examples here, if you look at WIOA, it can support related training instruction. It can support on-the-job training. But if the employer and the individual are eligible and everything aligns and the magic of the stars, right? So it's not an easy process, but it's something that we are dedicated to bring forward to help to assist industry. We have leveraged Department of Labor grants through our community college and others. We work with our state to look at different types of funding that may give us a little bit more flexibility. And through that, we are looking at very significant partnerships with organizations like those that are on this call, whether that's an industry that's brought that forward, or it's some regulatory boards or areas in that way, or once again, some of the training providers like our Dallas College system that helps to support this apprenticeship effort every day. But where we've seen the most success is through philanthropy and private grants. So when an employer and or business and or foundational organization steps in with funding, then we have the opportunity to apply that in a more flexible manner. And many times what we do is limit the number of companies that participate and the number of apprentices that are supported so that they can start to see that success. And with that success, they can bring those success stories back to their corporate, to their leadership, to their executive level and say, this works. And yes, we had the funding at the time, but this is a place where our company needs to put their funding going forward so we can grow our own, we can grow our industry, and we can develop our own talent internally.
And that really speaks to sustainability, which we're going to cover in our final segment, right? Of through the support of Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas, the accelerator, and those resources and enablers that you have, private businesses getting that proof of concept, right? And being able to take it back to justify that workforce strategy, just like you said. So to close out our conversation on innovation, I'm going to ask our panelists to hop in a time machine with us. So if you were building this model from scratch today, what would you do differently based on what you know now? Erin or Dana, I don't know which of you want to take it, but will you let us know what the time machine taught you?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Thanks, Sarah.
If I had a time machine and could go back and do it all differently, I would have started with the regulatory framework. I did not fully understand that not all states manage apprenticeship programs the same way, that some have the national apprenticeship standards and some use their own. And in our state, we use our own. So I feel like from an advocacy perspective, we are working to make apprenticeship programs more approachable through regulatory framework, but I wish I would have done that first to make it a little bit easier on us. The other thing I probably would have started with that we've kind of come to is building out a robust processing center for people interested in the apprenticeship program. The apprenticeship program that we started with is relatively small. There are about 130 nursing home administrators annually who get certified. And so we didn't think there would be a huge volume. But what we found is that in addition to creating opportunities for advancement, our registered apprenticeship program, being the only one for that role in the state, became a hub for people to find placement and to connect people entering the long-term care administrator role with potential employers. And we really hadn't built an infrastructure to handle that kind of coordination. So we scrambled it together as we went along and saw the need and have done that for our next apprenticeship program. But it's something that I really wish we would have had from the start to make it a better experience for the potential apprentices who came into our program.
Well, Erin, I'm hopeful by you sharing some of that framework and blueprint that you wished would have been laid out from the start with our audience today, that you're offering them the insight and thoughtfulness around their use cases and what some of those additional applications might be as they're building and scoping and looking at systems. So I think you're going to help others mature along their path and their journey of apprenticeship strategy as well. So Christian, you've had a moment to think about the time machine. Curious what you would do different now, knowing what you know now.
Oh man, tons of stuff I would do differently. But I think for us, I would focus on alignment earlier. I think and just be very intentional about building this as a system from the start. And that means just bringing all the businesses together and training providers and regulators together up front. So the expectations were clear and everybody knew what was going to happen and we're going to the same outcome. I think I would also, and this is going to be a little crazy, but I would probably design to scale from day one and not treat things like a pilot. And again, not necessarily that I wouldn't do a pilot. It just means that I think thinking about consistency across sites and how training connects to the job and what it takes to sustain over time. And I think more importantly, because we're in DC, DC is really tiny, I would look to take more regional approach from the beginning. DC is a really small market, and our business partners aren't necessarily thinking about talent by jurisdiction, right? Like they don't they don't necessarily need someone to be just from DC or just from Maryland or just from wherever, right? I would think about accents across the across talent, period. They don't care about the jurisdiction. So building pathways that extend across DC, Maryland, and Virginia earlier would have helped us move faster and create a stronger pipeline. And I would put more structure in place to support supervisors. I think for me, supervisors and those people in the trenches are the ones who are carrying this day to day. And if they're not set up for success, the model really struggles. And so that's what I would do earlier.
Christian, that vision setting, building with that long-term goal in mind really resonates. And I'm sure, regardless of the initiatives or the strategies for folks on the line, that hits home, right? Of not, applying the band-aids and building it piece by piece, but really having that architecture of what you're hoping to achieve in the process throughout. Lynn, okay, you've had a chance to hear your peers and think about the time machine. Curious what you would do differently, knowing what you know now.
Well, I call it the Wayback Machine. And so if we went way back in the Wayback Machine, and as we think of starting over what this accelerator, what this network would have looked like, it's really would have been bringing in those much more industry defined terminology, bringing it to business language and business speak, also breaking everything down into the individual components for them to help them understand they can simplify this process by bringing those pieces together and let us help work through that. I think that's one of the things is bring it to industry's language and bring it down to the simplest ways that they could put together the program themselves. I think the other, even though Christian said he may start with a pilot, but build to scale. I love that. And that's exactly what I think we would have done as well, is to identify more of those opportunities to spin off the smaller groups that are getting started and bring those success stories back. Because again, that brings the real value from a business perspective, and then they can see themselves replicating in those areas. And last but not least, in the accelerator format itself, we're great as conveners. We really love to talk about what we're doing, but because we are a loose net group and a network of stakeholders, common-minded, but not the same organization, we don't necessarily have KPIs. And from an accountability perspective, I think more structure around that, knowing exactly what goals we're trying to accomplish, and then measuring our success against those goals would be something we would have done sooner rather than later in the process.
That reflection and the piece of accountability, Lynn, I think really naturally takes us to our final segment as well, around how intentional scaling needs to be. And we heard it in Christian's time machine reflection as well. So we might not all agree, but some of us on the line might think we don't need more pilots, we're looking at all of these things and all of these spaces, but focus is what gets us that durability that we talked about at the top of the call. So our final segment is around scaling and building programs and strategies that are sustainable. And by virtue of what they've been covering, our panelists have already spoken to this quite a bit, but we're going to do a lightning round here in this final segment. So under 90 seconds, if we can, panelists, to garner your insights on a variety of different applications. So if Dana's ready, she's going to kick us off in the lightning round. Dana, what made organizations stay engaged beyond the launch phase?
Right. And I think we've all covered this as well, right? That measurable return on investment. We're filling critical skill gaps here. We're reducing recruitment cost and hopefully getting higher employee retention rates from this. So that all lines up with keeping organizations, employers, and employees engaged with this process as well. And we've also noted this already, the support, having Equus, there for our providers, walking through this, looking at the paperwork, dealing with these areas that certainly take time, and just knowing how to navigate some of these complexities as well. It's huge to have a partnership like that. And Aaron alluded to even the scalability with that. By having the support, they're able to do more. So that's something I think that's absolutely a game changer. And again, I think once individuals have their foot in a door through this apprenticeship, they quickly see how rewarding, whatever field it might be that they're in. And again, if it is a good fit for them. So it all ties back into why organizations stay engaged. It's really a win-win for the individual, for the organization, for the provider. And again, the partnership support is invaluable.
I love what you covered on return on investment, Dana, right? Because that's from a business and industry perspective, that's a shared outcome, and alleviating bottlenecks, helping where things might normally stall in complex programs like this, having partners support other peers to help you sustain that momentum, I think is such a great point. Aaron, I'd love to have you take our next lightning round question. What is the hardest part of scaling apprenticeships that people underestimate, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'm going to build a little bit on what Dana was talking about. So to me, the hardest part is getting continued buy-in when the funding runs out. Because you can get grants to start up your apprenticeship. You might even get a continuance grant. You can do braiding, which Lynn had reference to. But at the end of the day, the industry itself has to buy into the ROI that you're presenting to them. So you constantly have to make a case for the apprenticeship program, and that takes a lot of data. So it's not just launching the apprenticeship program. It's not just getting buy-in at the start. It's continually monitoring and reporting back what are the outcomes, not just financial return on investment for things that we can quantify very easily, like the reduced turnover costs, but how are we impacting our industry in a positive way? For us, in our use case, what's the impact on quality care? And being able to continually articulate that, regardless of a funding source, is critical to having buy-in from the industry and really scaling on a very large scale, and not just past a certain organization or a certain part of the state, to get statewide buy-in on the apprenticeship model. It's a huge lift, and it's a lot of data governance.
But really keeping it from being that flash in the pan, like you mentioned, Aaron. And you've actually set up Lynn's lightning round question perfectly. I was going to ask Lynn, what conditions must exist for apprenticeship to survive leadership or funding or other, priority changes? What is Workforce Solutions Greater Dallas seen?
Well, from our perspective, apprenticeship's going to survive these types of changes when it's owned on the ground. It's not just at the executive level, but it's at the actual functional level with the apprentices, the mentors, and the supervisors that are doing that work every single day. Because if leadership changes, if this structure is in place and it works, then the workers are going to push to maintain and retain that process, to bring in that new talent to develop it. But on the funding side, which we've talked about some, sustainability really depends on reducing the friction and the administrivia, that's my own word, all of those processes and systems that the employers have to go through. So if we can cut down on that administrative burden, help to support intermediaries, other organizations that can bring in the resources needed and come alongside, and then make the funding easier to access. If it's simple and it's valuable to the employers, then it's going to be sustainable and they're going to stay engaged long term.
And I love what you said about the apprentices and the supervisors, really building ambassadors, essentially, right? Regardless of structure, infrastructure, leadership changes, if it's working on the ground, we'll be hard pressed to take our eye off the ball from that angle. And really love what you reinforced around the funding and sustainability pieces. All right, Christian, you're going to bring us home in the lightning round, which kind of feels like trivia, Lynn, to your administrivia, new term. Christian, curious what positive impacts have apprenticeship models had on mentors and existing staff for employers in the association's network?
Oh, oh, I got an easy one. Thank you. So I think the biggest impact, and the biggest impact is the engagement, right? Mentors and supervisors they're just not managing tasks, right? They're literally truly developing people, and that creates just such a strong sense of ownership, right, and pride in the work. It also strengthens team culture, because learning becomes part of the environment and not something that's just completely separate, right? And then from that perspective, right, that scaling makes it easier, right? Scaling, it matters. Like as more staff become comfortable mentoring and developing talent, your capacity to grow the model increases, right? You're not just relying on a small group anymore. You're building a capability across the system, and so when people are a part of building talent, they become more invested in the outcome. And so I think for us, that's going to be the big conversation, right? Is scaling is just not about adding more apprentices. This is about building people, and building more people who can develop them. And so to me, that is the number one thing that provides impact for our mentors and staff.
You articulated that kind of exponential factor, right, Christian, of how things grow and where we're in people industries, how that looks and feels on the ground. So nicely done, panelists, on the lightning round. I appreciate each of you for taking a quick question to talk about scaling and sustainability and being really candid about what you've learned along the way, more so about what some of those road bumps and detours were, so that our attendees on the line and anyone listening to the recording can really benefit from those lessons learned and those best practices. As we wrap up, I'd probably summarize with 3 takeaways that really anchor today's conversation, for me at least. First, we know apprenticeship works when it's treated as shared infrastructure. We heard that in each of your responses, not a standalone program. Christian, I think you said program to system to strategy, and I really liked that, the description of that progression. So when employers, workforce systems, education, training partners, policy makers all see themselves as co-owners, apprenticeship becomes something that can endure and adapt. Second, I'd say real innovation isn't just about new training models. It comes from redesigning work itself. We heard that, how roles are structured, how learning and employment are sequenced, and how people move into and through roles. Erin covered that really beautifully. That mindset shift is what unlocks opportunity at scale. And finally, third, sustainability depends on system ownership, not hero leaders. I think it was Lynn who said not just at that executive level. So strong leadership matters. Yes, we'd all agree. But lasting impact requires embedding apprenticeship into how systems operate, how they budget, and how they make decisions. So then it can weather changes in leadership, funding, or priorities. At Equus, our work across the country shows us that when regions align intentionally, apprenticeship stops just being a workforce tool and starts becoming a true strategy for growth, both for communities and industries alike. We really appreciate all of you for joining us today and spending a bit of National Apprenticeship Week convening with each other. We've recorded the session today, and I'll be sharing that out via email in the next week or so you can refer back to it or share with peers in your network. I've also popped up our apprenticeship team's contact information on the slide if you'd like to continue the conversation. So I thank you again to our panelists. You were wonderful prepping and thinking about what would be thoughtful and beneficial today, and we appreciated your candor. So thank you again, everyone, for spending National Apprenticeship Week, a part of it with us. We hope today's session sparks new conversation, connections, and ideas. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.